It is a great pleasure to welcome one Chris Brown. He is the host of the Cross Borders podcast, where he talks to members of local governments across Canada. How you say, Chris? Thank you for joining us.
Not not bad, and thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this discussion. I've had the pleasure of listening to a few of your past episodes, so I'm really looking forward to being on the other side of the interview for the first time in a while. So it's always interesting to talk about yourself. So I'm ready, I'm willing, and let's get into it.
I'm glad to hear it, and I'm glad to hear that you've been paying attention to my show. It's been fun doing it, although receiving feedback from people have not been like a frequent experience all that much, but still I appreciate it. So first off, you have the same name as that one famous or infamous R&B singer, and listeners will be sorely disappointed to see that I'm not talking to the actual Chris Brown, the R&B singer. So I wonder if people have pointed that out to you before.
Oh, they certainly have. So I've run for municipal office and even federal office here in Canada three times, and each time that my name gets put on the sign, you always see on social media, "Oh, Chris Brown, the R&B singer, is running in our local area." And then when they finally do end up meeting me, it's a little bit of a culture shock when they say, "Oh, you're not that Chris Brown." And jokingly, it's always fun to uh, I guess no news is good news, and sometimes if they're talking about you, that means that you're doing something right. So it's been an ongoing fun experience, and I'm not the only one. There's a few other Chris Browns in this world, and I have another show on my in the grand scheme of the cross border media family called No Not Them, which I sit down with a gentleman named Michael Nichols.
Hmm.
And for those who might know, Mike Nichols is the famous
Yeah.
Emmy, Tony, Grammy, Oscar winner, and we talk about the entertainment industry as only two people who aren't the people you're thinking of only can. So I've leaned into it a little bit, but for the cross-border interview series, it's mostly just the political, and uh, it's always interesting when you get the politicians or the guests who come on your show and sort of talk and say, "Oh, I was expecting the R&B singer," and then they see a bigger white guy on at the end of the call instead of the actual R&B singer.
So tell me about your experience running for did you say city council, right?
So I ran for municipal council back in
Mm.
Ontario in 2010. I was a young 18-year-old, and I can tell you that being 18, being a go-getter, I thought to myself, I'm gonna win. The local councillor was moving up. He was running from local councillor to regional councillor, and I thought, what's the worst that could happen? I'm gonna win. I'm the young guy, and everyone likes the when a young guy gets involved in politics. So I put my name forward in 2010. There were six other candidates, seven including myself, who had put their name forward, and it was an interesting experience because I had been on the other side of the political experience before. I'd helped out on campaigns. My family was very politically active, very politically motivated. It was a dinner table conversation that we'd have most nights about what the issues were going on municipally, provincially, and even federally. And in 2010, I said, well, why not? I'm not doing much. I just got out of university, so why not try to run for political office? Um, Going around meeting with people, it was fun, it was exciting. And then on election night, I came six out of seven candidates, so I didn't come last, which was always a good thing because you never want to come last. But that was my first experience into the to the into the elected politics. And then in 2015, I ran for the federal Liberal Party under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in the riding of Peace River Westlock. Yet again, being a Liberal in Northern Alberta, you kind of have a expectation that you may not do as well as you might think. But there was a sort of a culture change going on in Canada at that time. Stephen Harper had been in office for 10 years. I decided that I'd put my name for it because my political ideology lined up with the Liberals at that time. And I ran and I came third out of 6 candidates. So I was moving up in the grand scheme of things. So I went from 6th place in my first election, 3rd place in the second election. So I knew I'd get elected one day. Shocking. And then 2 years later, in this Big Lakes County, which is a county in northern Alberta where I was living when I ran for the federal Liberals, I decided to put my name forward in the municipal election that was happening in 2017. I ran. It was only me and the incumbent because I'm a big proponent that no one should ever be acclaimed to office. I understand that it happens. It's happening more and more often in this day and age, but I decided that I was going to not do that and not allow it because I'm a capable human being. I would put my name forward. So I put my name forward. It was just me and the incumbent. And and as much as I don't like to say I came last, I say I came second in that election because there was only 2 people running. So last and second is a difference. So I always say I came second. So that's where my political experience comes from. And I've enjoyed it. Do I anticipate myself running ever again in the future? I don't know. Not right now, though.
Mhm. So, at the risk of probably endangering your privacy, why don't you tell us about the local area in which you live?
So I live in Calgary, Alberta. So for those who might be listening, it is the second largest, or it might be even the largest community in the province of Alberta. I live in the Northeast Calgary, very diverse area. Our local MP is George Chahal. We border George Chahal and Jasraz Singh Holland's ridings for the MPs of Calgary Forest Lawn and Calgary Skyview. I just moved here. I had never lived in a large town compared to Toronto. When I left Toronto to move out west of Canada, I said I would never live in a large town, a large city ever again. But I married my husband, and here we are because I you do for your loved ones. So when I got married to my husband, I moved in, and it's been 5 years of learning what the new experience of Calgary is. And I would highly recommend it. It's a 2-hour drive, an hour and a half, depending on who's driving, to the Rocky Mountains, Banff area. It's about a 3-hour drive to Montana, which is quite fun. It's sort of the geographic center of southern Alberta, where everyone can go to Saskatchewan, BC, Manitoba, or even if you want to go up to Edmonton. It is a great community, and I would highly recommend it to anyone who's ever thinking about moving to Canada. Look at Alberta and look at Calgary for sure.
Awesome. Yeah. I've known many people who are from or around Calgary when doing this program. Many of them are musicians. One of them you may already know, Megan Page. I actually got introduced to your program through her, specifically through your show with her. So, how did you guys get in contact with each other?
So do you want the long story or the short Cole's Notes version of the story? So originally, when I started the cross-border interviews, it was not intended to be so municipally focused, so local government focused. Now, if you go back to the early days of the show, which we've just passed our 600th episode as of recording this, so when you go back to the very first few hundred episodes of the show, we talk to anyone because in our day and culture of social media where everything is done by a 250 character tweet or like a social media post, I found that the lost art of the conversation was missing. So I started having this idea of doing this show, and it sparked because I enjoyed talking. I was a former journalist by trade, and I liked actually talking and interviewing my guests, whoever that be, whether it be for the radio job I had, the television job, or the print job. And I always hated cutting it down. I hated cutting down the original soundbite or the 4-minute interview down to 10-second clip or a 100-word sentence for a 100-word story, or a 2-second or a 30-second radio story. So when I launched the show in 2018, 2019, I said, I'm never going to edit my shows and I'm never going to do that. And I would sit down with anyone who would want to come on the show. So if you reached out, I would have you on the show because I think everyone has a story to tell and everyone has the ability to tell that story. So when I first launched in 2019, the Canadian Country Music Award Associations was happening here in Calgary, Alberta. And I thought, young upstart podcast, why not go do some musicians while they have their quote unquote media row, which you sit down, media sits down and guest after guest just comes in, sits down for 5 minutes and goes away. I did it. I enjoyed it. And then the CCMAs left from Calgary. They went to Ontario and then they came back literally last year, I want to say. So last September. Don't quote me on that. I'm probably getting this wrong, and probably anyone who's listening to this will correct me on it. The CCMAs sent out a list of people you could possibly talk to. Being the Alberta show, I thought, well, let's talk to some Alberta musicians, the independent musicians. And that's where Megan and I first actually connected. So her and I connected on the show through the CCMAs. I had her on for 10 minutes. She started following along. And then most recently in June, long story short, we can go into this later if you want, or if you don't worry about it. In 2020, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And we had a brain tumor foundation walk, which happens all across Canada in June, because June is brain cancer awareness month. And I'm sort of part of the organization team here in Calgary, and we were looking for musicians. So I put a call out for musicians here in Calgary. And I said, any musicians who want to come, happy to have you on. Megan, being a follower on the show on social media, reached out and said, we'd love to. We'd come down. I said, well, we don't have money to pay you, so if you want to, that's great. And she came down, and she came down very quickly. And she came down that day, left that day. And I appreciated that. And I said to her, thank you so much for being on the show. And my memory is not the best at all. So when she came down, she came on, did the music for the opening ceremonies of the Brain Tumor Foundation walk. I said, thank you so much for this. I want to have you back. I want to have you on the show. And she goes, I've already been on your show at the CCMAs. And me being the sort of, oh God, I forgot that she was on the show because I've had so many people on. Then let's go do a longer interview. Let's do a 30-40 minute interview then. She goes, perfect. So she left, and we've been great friends, and I've been staying in touch with her ever since. And we're hoping that we can pay her back even more later on this fall with some promotions and some concerts down here, because she is a fantastic artist. And I think that if you're not listening to her right now, anyone who's listening to this, please go to meganpage.com, go look up her website and listen to her music. She is fantastic, and I believe she's a superstar in the making here in Alberta, but not only that, of Canada. So that's how I got to know Megan.
Couldn't have said by myself. Yeah. Got in contact with her through another great country musician from Alberta. I think Martina Dawn is her name. And that is how I came to know Megan. They're friends. So, if you ask her about Martina, she'll tell you. They've all been guests on this program. And yes, she is a fantastic artist and also a great person to talk to as well. But
I will have to try and get her on my show then.
Oh yeah. I look forward to hearing your conversation with her. So yeah, you mentioned the brain tumor, which I'm sorry that happened to you. I hope you're doing better now.
As good as one can be under the circumstances.
So moving back to the topic of local government, how would you describe the people who are currently running Calgary, so to speak? Have you gotten in contact with any of them for the show? Yeah.
Yes. So back in 2021, when Alberta was going through a massive municipal election, I had just started going through my treatments for cancer. So I was going through radiation and chemo. So I wasn't really going out, and it was the height of the pandemic. And I wanted to try and bring democracy back, because I always find that when you have a voter turnout averaging about 30 to 50%, that is bad for democracy. And I don't care who you are, what you say, that is horrible for democracy when you have only 30% of the people showing up. So in 2021, in the early days, I said, well, I have the show. I should shut up or put up, and I could get these people who are in the midst of a global pandemic who can't go out and door knock as they traditionally would in any situation. And I will try and get as many of them on the show to talk about their campaigns, their desires of why they want to be on city council. And we sat down with, I think, uh, five. That's when we moved from, because it was season 3, we moved from 2 episodes a week to 5 episodes a week, and we haven't looked back from that, the 5 episodes a week. So we went from, I think, the middle of August or beginning of September to October, to the election day, 5 days a week, possibly even 7 by the closer, because we had more people come on once they found out that I was doing this. And I sat down with, I would say, as of right now, as of like probably today, I'd say I'd sat down with 6 out of the 15 counselors or counselors who were, or people who were running to be counselors who are now effectively on council. And I got to know them. So I got to know them. I got to meet them one-on-one. I had a great conversations with them. And during that time, where do we find you? I should have asked that beforehand. Like, where are you located right now?
Vienna, Austria, so definitely not in
Oh,
Canada.
okay. So you're in Austria. So I'm not sure about the local government aspect of this whole situation, but in Austria, um, there's, I'm assuming there's mayors and there's councillors. They might have different names, but
Yeah.
during local elections, the most prominent feature, especially here in Canada, is the mayor. They, like, mainstream media, and I hate using the word mainstream media, but the main media looks at the mayor race and that's it. They don't care about the down ballots, the school board trustees, this. So they'll hold debates for the mayor, they'll hold debates for this, that, or the other, but they won't hold councillors debates. And I said, we need that. Our small organizations aren't hosting them anymore because they can't, but I can. I know I'm going through cancer treatments. I know I'm going through a bit of a life-changing area right now. So I started hosting debates as well as doing the interviews. So people started coming onto the show and started saying, hey, are you going to host a debate for Ward 2, Ward 3, Ward 4? So I became kind of the Calgary municipal guy. People started coming to me, which I was happy about, don't get me wrong, but it was a learning experience. Going back to the original question about how do I view the current state of council, they're going through some challenges. They're going through some massive challenges right now, and I say that with respect. The world, we are out of the global pandemic, and we're into the global sort of financial, economic pandemic that we're currently seeing. There's a lot of issues around financial stability right now here in Canada. House prices are going up. Construction isn't happening as fast as it needs to house people. And there's a lot of things that are being put on this council's plate that I would highly suspect that all other municipalities here in Canada, but even across the world, are dealing with as well. And there is a big push in the province of Alberta where you're seeing, and I want to use my words correctly here, you're seeing a bit of a divide. You're seeing a right-left divide. And in Canada, our municipal politicians are all elected independently. They don't run under a banner, but we're seeing the creep, the sort of, how do I put this? You're seeing the entrance of partisan politics into our municipal governments, and I think it's going to be bad for our society. And I don't mean that parties are running slates of candidates, which they have in the past. They haven't really traditionally done well, but here in Alberta, in Canada, in Calgary, we have traditionally gone against however we voted provincially. So provincially, it's more of a right-wing party. Calgary has gone more of a center-right, center-left party, or center-left mayor. We had Mayor Naheed Nenshi. He wouldn't be considered conservative as much as anyone would say. He would be sort of seen as the sort of liberal left, center left party. And he was in power during a lot of the conservative reigns provincially. So Calgary is one of these unique situations where we do traditionally elect more progressive center left, center right candidates. But I don't expect that to happen next election. I expect it to be a little bit more of a culture shift in the next election because of all the financial issues that are going on, plus the rise of the global sort of conservative viewpoints that are being put out there.
Yes. I understand that currently the incumbent governor of Alberta is a woman named Danielle Smith. And
so just to clarify on that before you enter and that's send question. So in the States they're called governors, but here in Alberta, here in Canada,
premier,
they're
sorry.
called
Yeah, premier.
premiers. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, my bad, my mistake. But yeah, Premier
No worries.
Danielle Smith of Alberta, and she is part of the Conservative Party, and I got to know, her deal a bit through listening to her interview with Jordan Peterson. But so I may not know much about local government in general, and particularly Canadian local government, but I know a lot about the left-right divide of Western politics, so to speak.
Are you not seeing that in Austria? Are you not seeing that in Austria?
I am.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask that question because I want to know where the question's going to go, so that way I can answer it correctly here. So go for it.
Okay. So the question I wanted to ask is that, how does the left-right political division manifest itself in your local area, Calgary or Alberta in general?
So in the last provincial election, we saw Alberta is a very unique situation. And I say that with respect to the province because it's been my home for the last almost 12 years now, 5 years here in Calgary. Until 2015, the conservative, the more right-wing, center-right parties had traditionally run this province. But in 2015, after 44 years of conservative rule, a party called the New Democratic Party, which is Rachel Notley, she basically upended the political class here in Alberta, and she won a majority government, which would never been considered 10, 15, 20 years ago here in the province. But here we were. And in the last provincial election, we saw that we traditionally had about 3 or 4 smaller parties who would run, more center, more left, more right. But in the last provincial election, with Premier Danielle Smith and Rachel Notley as the two leaders of the two major parties, we saw a very big divide. We saw the left versus the right, the NDP versus the Conservative. And the smaller parties kind of got shut out of the conversation in that aspect, because we saw that Danielle Smith had cultivated the right. Prior to her, Jason Kenney, you had seen some splinters. You saw sort of the rise of the Independence Party, which wanted Alberta to leave the province of the Confederation of Canada. You saw different parties start up on the right because they thought that Jason Kenney wasn't as far right as he should be. And then on the left, Rachel Notley had been sort of amalgamating what the left was prior to her winning in 2015 with the Liberals, the Greens, the Alberta Party, and molding it into just the umbrella of the Alberta Party. So in the first time since I had moved here and since I'd been an active participant in politics since 1990, Alberta came down to a very linear choice: left, right, Conservative, or the UCP here in Canada, or the NDP. And it was very, very unique because it was either you're with us or you're against us. And we saw here in Calgary sort of the north-south divide. So the further south in Calgary you get, the more, and I say this with respect to the people who live there because I don't live there, I live in the Northeast. You see more of the sort of the oil and gas industry workers and their executives who live in that area. So they're traditionally more of the conservative voters. Up north in the Northeast and the Northwest, you see more of the new Canadians, new transplants to the Canadian country. And you saw when you looked at the map, while it was a very close vote, you saw more of the left party, the NDP, win more of the seats in the north, and you saw the Conservatives win more in the south. So there is a divide in this province right now that the Premier, Danielle Smith, has to sort of come to realization that as more new Canadians come here, the idea that they're all going to vote Conservative is not going to probably stick. So she's been trying to reach out to the more immigrant communities in Canada, in Alberta, in Calgary, in Edmonton, and it's going to be something that I'll be watching for some time, because the Conservative Party in this province have a tendency to kick out their party leader if they believe they're performing poorly. And the right likes to eat its young. So Jason Kenney survived 3 years as premier before he got turfed. Premier Smith has said she's going to try and stay on for an entire year. Is that going to happen? I don't know. And I suspect that she's going to try, but I don't know what's going to happen 2 years from now. So let's see.
Yeah, so as much as I know about Alberta, it is obviously a province where much of Canada's oil reserves and natural gas reserves are located, and
Yep.
it has more conservative politics, if not culture. So perhaps the American equivalent would be that of Texas, right? And people, I think in Texas, people are worrying that there are citizens moving in from, say, states like California and New York, which are traditionally more liberal, and there were like worries about how Texas is going to be turned blue, so to speak, as well. Yeah, so the oil and natural gas seems to be very animating political issues in Alberta politics in general, because as much as I'm concerned, the current prime minister of your country, Justin Pierre Trudeau, is not a big fan of the oil and gas industry. Would that be a correct statement?
I think it would be a correct statement depending on where you live in the country. So traditionally, Justin Trudeau is, again, putting all the cards on the table. I ran for him in 2015, so I might be a little bit biased in this statement, but he's looking at the transition away from oil and gas. And for anyone in Alberta who knows, the oil and gas industry has been the lifeblood of this province. It is the reason why people get up. It's the reason why people made a lot of money in the 80s and 90s. And it's the reason why people still stay here. When you have a prime minister in Canada who is saying we need to transition away from the oil and gas industry, of course people are going to be upset, and highly rightfully so, because they believe that their livelihoods and the economic stability of their family is being attacked by a prime minister who lives in Ottawa, who represents a Quebec riding, who doesn't really know the the in and outs of what's going on in the oil and gas sector here in Alberta. And it's not just Alberta. I should mention that as well. Saskatchewan is quite a power player in the oil and gas industry as well. They're our sister province right beside us. We're sort of wedged in between British Columbia and Manitoba. But Trudeau, and God bless him, he's probably a nice guy. I've met him once and he seemed like a nice guy. Prime Minister Trudeau's a nice guy. You can't unilaterally say you're going to shut down something by a certain date without the expectation that people are going to be upset, and rightfully so. Premier Smith has basically said, if you're going to shut us down, we're going to introduce something called the Sovereignty Act, which will basically supersede any policy or direction that the federal government tries to unilaterally impose on the province of Alberta with respects to anything. And I know that's a very blanket term, but it's something that the province and Premier Smith has tried to do. It has not been used yet. It has been threatened to be used, but there is a big battle right now, and it's the one thing that Trudeau and Smith both sort of have in their corner is when Trudeau is going against Alberta, he does well in Quebec. When Smith goes against Trudeau, she does well in the rural areas of Alberta, which is the outskirts of Edmonton and Calgary. So it's a political match made in heaven. They just don't want to admit the fact that they're doing it for political reasons. But going back to the oil and gas industry, I suspect that the realization that the oil and gas industry is still a major power player in here is something that Justin Trudeau knows. He just knows that if he has to win politically, he has to appease some people in Ontario and Quebec who don't rely so heavily on the oil and gas industry.
Mhm. Right. I think that in addition to a left-right political divide, there's also a divide between those who live in cities, particularly big cities, and those living in rural areas. And as much as I understand the left and right divide because they're based on ideas, um, urban rural seems a bit less, I guess, what I call it, clear for me because it's based on where you've lived, and frankly, I'm terrible at describing the rural life condition because I've only lived in big cities and small towns. So why don't you elaborate us on what that divide is, so to speak?
Man, you just pressed the button that is about to give you about a 20-minute conversation about the urban rural divide that is present in this country. There's more than just the urban rural divide. There's more than just the left right divide. There's the north south divide. There's the east west divide. There's the anglophone francophone divide. But let's talk about the urban rural divide because I think it's a prominent thing that a lot of people don't take serious enough. So we have municipal organizations in this country, and I will be the first to admit it, and they will be the first to admit it, that there's rural municipal organizations. So in Alberta alone, there's something called the Rural Municipalities of Alberta, which is led by President Paul McLaughlin, who is a reeve of a county. Then there is President Kathy Heron, who represents the Alberta municipalities, which is sort of the cities, the towns, the smaller communities. The issue is, where do you put the money that the federal and the provincial government doles out to the municipalities? Now, the urban would say you put the money where the majority of people are. Seems reasonable, seems understandable. The rural communities would say, no, 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 no. Just because you have more people doesn't mean that our issues aren't as important. Our roads that you use, that city dwellers use to drive, to go to their vacations, to go to work, they're crumbling. So we need money as well. So when it comes to the urban rural divide for the municipal standpoint, the local government standpoint, it really comes down to money. And money makes the world go round. And over the last few years during COVID-19, there was a big disparity that we saw in rural communities versus urban communities. The urban communities were able to make their payments. The rural communities fell further and further behind because they were using their sort of the rainy day funds to pay for the offsets that they were not getting from the federal and provincial government. So when we talk about the urban rural divide here in Canada, it honestly comes down to money. When people are moving to Canada, and I will say this, my husband will disagree with me, and probably a few people who are listening to this will disagree with me as well. When people move to Canada, they're not moving to the small rural communities. They're not moving to the communities that traditionally are seeing the housing market more vacant. They're moving to urban centers like Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, Vancouver. Why? Because there is a culture there that sort of fosters the cultural aspect of where they've come from, the immigrants, or there's a cultural aspect of where their families have resided as well. So my husband's an immigrant. He moved here from Nicaragua in the early 80s. He moved to Calgary because he had family here in Calgary. So you move to where your family is. You're not traditionally moving to a smaller community in rural Alberta because you may not know people, but also the culture might not be there. So there's a cultural divide there as well when it comes to new Canadians moving to this country. And even when it comes to like people like myself who've born and raised in Canada, lived here. My family's lived here since the 1800s. We moved here after it's when Benedict Arnold left from America to Canada. Our family left with him as well because we were monarchists. So when we moved here, we've literally stayed in areas that where our families are. So it's odd that I moved out to Alberta because I knew no one here. But the rural communities are dying. And I say that with respect to the rural communities who I've had on my show, because when I ask them what is the biggest issue that's going on in their community, it's growth, it's stagnation. Businesses aren't being attracted to rural communities anymore because there's more incentives to build in a larger center like Calgary or Edmonton. You are seeing more businesses who are moving to rural communities asking about, is there a proper internet provider? Is there high-speed internet? Because that's what they need. And when most municipalities say, well, we have a satellite or we don't have fiber optics, most businesses won't move there. So the infrastructure that rural communities need to thrive is not being put in, and it's harming our rural communities, and our urban centers are thriving and growing at a pace that is not going to keep up in 10-15 years when there's literally no place to grow but up. And right now there's a lot of NIMBYism. I'm not sure if there's a lot in Austria, but NIMBYism is not in my backyard. So people just don't want things to grow. They want the things to stay the same. And I will be blunt, if that's going to keep up, Canada is going to become a stagnant country here in the next 5-10 years, and we have to battle back against the NIMBYism to make our urban centers thrive. But we also need to start investing in our smaller rural communities to make sure that they thrive with the proper funding for infrastructure, for proper internet access, for proper cell phone coverage. I'm driving halfway across Canada literally tomorrow, a Sunday, and I'm going to visit all the communities who have come on my show. And I can tell you, I've been looking at maps of cell phone coverages. There's areas where I'll be out of cell phone coverage for 3.5 hours. 3.5 hours in a first world country to not have cell phone, let alone not even talking about water issues as well. There we have First Nation reserves and also communities on boil water advisories in 2023. That should not be happening. So we need to invest. It's just our political class doesn't want to invest in things that aren't seen as political vote getters anymore.
Yes, it's a concern that I share too. But before we get to that, I want to get on this aside, given that you've told me that your husband is from Nicaragua and he moved to Canada in the 80s, which brings up the turmoil that happened in that country in that decade, right, with the Sandinistas and the Contras and such. And President Reagan of the U.S. Went into big trouble because of what happened there. So I wonder if has he been sharing, say, information regarding how he came to get to Canada?
So he told me how he got to Canada, and I don't want to speak for him, so I am going to have to respectfully decline that question. And
Okay.
the only reason I say that is because he's told me things, and I've told you right up front, my memory is not as good as it used to be. So I don't want to say things that may not be factually accurate. And I don't want to say things. So, and for those who are listening, my husband was elected in 2015 under Rachel Notley for the NDP. So he was Minister of Tourism, Culture, and Franco francophone affairs here in the province of Alberta from 2016 to 2019. So that's how him and I met. So when it comes to the question about what his experiences are, A, I didn't live it, so I don't want to say it, but B, my memory's not as good as it was. So I would respectfully just say I'm unable to answer that question just due to the fact that I might get something wrong and I don't want to be factually inaccurate.
Understood. And we are back to the main road, so to speak. Yeah, and I think yeah, you've mentioned the divide between the Anglophones and the Francophones. And I think for most people, when it comes to think about French Canada, they just think of Quebec. And I wonder if French speaking Canadians, do they live scattered across Canada? Or what are their
Oh,
political interests?
there is a massive scattering. Like, don't get me wrong, the most concentrated area is Quebec because it is a French speaking country, but French speaking province. Sorry for those who are listening in Quebec who just heard me say country, they might get a little aroused by that because they did try to
Yes.
tried to separate twice. But they are a province and they should stay a province, and confederation only works when everyone pulls together. But in the province of New Brunswick, there is a massive francophone community as well. It is actually technically the only francophone anglophone bilingual province outside of Quebec. So Quebec is traditionally a bilingual country, province. It's too early in the morning for this, man. So you got Quebec province that is francophone and anglophone. The current premier Francois Legault is trying to make it more francophone because he believes that the francophone the French language is dying in our country, so he's trying to make it more a francophone province. Now in New Brunswick, it is truly a bilingual province. You have a very large francophone community, but you also have a very large anglophone community. And when you apply for a job in New Brunswick, the only reason I know this is because I applied for a job there a few years ago. They asked me, "Do I speak French and am I converse in French and English?" And I can tell you, I have probably basic grade 12 French because that's what I took it up to. And after that, nothing. My husband, though, he could speak it like there's no tomorrow. When it comes to the rest of Canada, though, I wouldn't say there's a large portion of the country that is francophone, but I would say there's scattering. So here in the province of Alberta, there's a city called Beaumont, Alberta. The only reason I know this is because I had one of their Councillor Catherine McCook on the show, and she said it's a bilingual community. I was just recently up there. It is a bilingual community. St. Isidore, which is in the northern part of the province of Alberta, near Peace River, is a francophone community. So there is a francophone subsect that is outside the province. I wouldn't say it's the majority of provinces, but we are a bilingual country. We will always be a bilingual country. And it's always great when you have premiers who are supposed to be able to speak about the official languages. I say supposed to, it's not a written rule, but it is are both official languages. And when one premier can't speak in one of the official languages, it's always interesting when our French-speaking radio stations here in Alberta ask French-speaking questions to our premier or to other premiers in Western Canada, and they have to get a translator to translate it into English. It's not concerning. I chuckle at it from time to time, but again, I don't speak French, so I can't really say yay or nay that they're doing a bad job. I just think it's funny.
So I wonder what propels you to be as concerned as you are regarding local municipal politics?
I don't think it's sexy enough. Just to be blunt. In Canada, we are so passionate about Justin Trudeau and his socks and his hair that it bothers me. We don't talk about policy anymore. When it comes to provincial politics, we care about the stumble. We care about this person said this on the 15th of September, so that means they're an asshole. Pardon my French, I'm not sure if I can swear on this, but they are very much, our society has grown so crazy with ideas that this person is bad and this person is good, that we have forgotten truly, and I'm going to quote the president of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities here, the government of proximity. We say here in Canada that the municipal government is always the one that we least think about. Why do we do that? And it's because it's the one that affects us the most, but we don't think about the most. When your garbage is picked up, when your water turns on, we're happy. When our taxes are low, we're happy. When your garbage doesn't get picked up, we're going to notice. When our water doesn't turn on, I'm going to notice. But when the passport office closes federally, it may not affect me until I have to go renew 3, 4, 6 months from now, or even 4 years from now. When the provincial government closes and we're not seeing benefits come in, we might not see it till the end of the month. But the municipal government is always the one that we forget about. When you turn on the national news here in Canada, the only time municipal governments and local governments are in the news is when something goes wrong, when something bad happens. And I think that's really hard to understand. Why do we only look at the bad? I know it sells column inches. I know it sells airtime. I know people tune in for that stuff. But it shouldn't be the reason why news organizations only cover certain things. And we are seeing a very big decline of local news here in Canada. The municipalities are not being covered the way they were when I was a journalist. And I say journalist as in print, radio, and television back in Ontario, in northern Alberta, and even Saskatchewan. When I see the decline of journalism and the decline of telling the stories that need to be told, because municipalities are the lifeblood of this country. And I know every politician will say that, but I believe that they're the ones that are making the biggest impact with the money that they're given, because they can't run deficits. They have to take the money they have and use it, and can't spend over, can't spend under, they can't borrow against anything. They literally have to spend what they have. End of sentence. Federal governments and provincial governments are so far in debt, they don't even know how much money they owe half the time. Municipalities know. Municipalities know that if they have X, Y, and Z, they have to get done. X, Y, and Z has to be paid for. And how do they do that? They have to raise taxes. And there's only one taxpayer. So when I move to a more local governance mindset, I did it because of two things. One, I think municipalities are important and they matter. Two, I started talking to a gentleman back in 2021 by the name of Ian McCormick. He wrote a book called Who's Driving the Grader? It's about local governments. And I highly recommend anyone who is listening to this or watching this, go to Amazon, go to ianmccormick.com and buy this book, especially if you're passionate about municipal governments, because it basically outlines the what's going on in municipal governments here in Canada. And when I read that book, it sort of sparked an interest. So we started talking to municipal politicians. And what I found was people wanted to listen to people talking about municipal politics. I said, why is this? Why are people so passionate about municipal politics, but it's not being covered in the grand scheme of the nightly news or a dedicated podcast like mine? I said, well, I have a podcast, so why don't I do it? So I started doing this literally February of this year, where it's literally being just municipal politics 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And we've gotten followers, we've gotten people reaching out, we've gotten communities saying, thank you for bringing attention to this local issue. And I'm thinking to myself, this is what journalism and reporting should be about. It should be about the good, the bad, and the ugly. It shouldn't just be about the ugly. And I wanted to be open and honest, and I wanted to just sit down and have that conversation with municipal leaders who are literally making the decisions that are going to impact us on a daily basis more often than the provincial and federal governments. So why do I do it? I do it because of that. I do it because there is a need, and our media landscape in this country has changed so much that municipal local governments does not get the due that it should.
So there's a great text in the 19th century called Democracy in America by Alexis de Tocqueville, a Francophone, by the way. He he visited America as a Frenchman, as a French nobleman, I think, and he found that democracy best manifests itself in the local communities which he visited, um, because of all the reasons that you've listed. And his book has been praised and quoted, but I don't think people learn from that book enough. In the U.S., there's this resurgence of people who looks to open that book again and find key lessons from it. Um, a few things come to mind when big national leaders invoke the name of democracy. They often democracy just meant anything to them, really. It just means good. Um, Whereas I think in democratic local governance, democracy can be rather messy because you have all these people, each one with an opinion and a leaning and a partisan flair, so to speak, arguing over pretty much basic essential issues. And another problem that I noticed concerns, I guess, what you call Anglo-American conservatism. And I'm sure in Canada, conservatism means something like anti-big government. We don't like big government. We don't like high taxes and such. Well, they probably meant the federal government, which may be a legitimate position, but in local areas, the government is key to making sure that the community is safe and sound. Everything is in order for the same reasons that you've listed. So, of course, government is important and democracy is messy. I wonder if those you've come to what do you call it, learn those two things the hard way or the easy way.
So I'm going to challenge you a little bit on that statement that you just
Okay.
made, because you said it's messy when you have 7 people around a council table and they all have different opinions. It's not like the partisan politics where you're left side, right side, center side, whatever side, and you're just battling against each other. I think I think it's more messy when you have those partisan labels attached to you, especially when you're so federally. You have the Liberal Party, the Greens, the Conservatives, the Bloc Québécois, and the NDP. I find that more messy. I find that more messy because you, as an elected official, and I shouldn't, like, I literally ran for the party, so I can't say this, but you, as an elected official, have to toe the party line. Yes, you get the few mavericks who will say, "Oh, I don't believe in this. I'm going to vote with the other side on this issue," but it's rare. Municipally, locally, I think that's fascinating. I think it's fascinating when you have 7 different opinions around the table who are able to openly debate, openly discuss the issues that are present in your community and come to an understanding. I would rather work with someone who doesn't agree with me 100% of the time than be working with someone who is forcing me to agree with them 100% of the time. So when it comes to municipalities, I think messy is good. I think that when you have counselors and a mayor around a table willing to have an open debate in a council chambers about the future, about a certain topic, then God bless them, because that is what a democracy should be. It should be an open exchange of ideas between 2 people or 3 people or 8 people or 150 people, and having that conversation. When we get put into our tribe, the political tribes that we have in here in Canada, conservative, NDP, liberal, Greens, then it doesn't help our democracy. It actually stifles our democracy, because then we become the echo chambers of our society. And municipalities, and that's why I'm a big proponent against having political parties municipally here in Canada. Some municipalities do, Vancouver, lower mainland BC, Montreal, they do have political parties. I am against that. I believe that is the worst thing that could happen to our democratic institution here municipally. And the reason I say that is because then you will see the creep of what's going on in Ottawa, what's going on in your local, provincial, territorial capital come into the municipal realm, where people are just running to to the next election. They're governing to be elected and not governing to govern. And I think that's where municipalities are thriving right now. They are thriving on the ability to govern in a nonpartisan, non-political way. I have sat down with people who have considered themselves politically conservative, NDP, Green, Liberal, and at the end of the day, they know when they get to that council table, they do not believe that. They believe that they are a councillor first. They are a representative of their city, and they have to look at issues for a city, not through a political lens. So I'm not trying to be rude. I'm not trying to be rude at all, and I do apologize if it's coming off that way. I just think it's fascinating that we have a democratic system that is willing to have people from different political ideologies talk to each other and even debate, which is a thing that we do not do in this country or in this world anymore, because we'd rather do it on Twitter or social media. And I think that we believe in the fairness that comes with being able to sit at a council table with a local representative who may not agree with you on 100% of the issues, but you know that you were there fighting for the best for your community. And I think that's the big thing. Now, coming back to the second question, why do people not care about the democratic rule? Because it's not sexy. They don't care. They would rather yell into the void that is social media. And as much as I use social media, and I try to get away from it as much as I do, I think it's one of these things that needs to continue to happen to thrive. But we need to realize that you're like, I love it when I see people yell on Twitter about X, Y, and Z to a politician who is not even reading the issues that are going on. So I think our democratic society is dying because of social media, but I think it also is a good thing, but it just needs to be utilized in the correct way.
I stand corrected, and it wasn't rude in any way at all. So just to reassure you, you did mention
Okay.
you did mention the lack of, say, press coverage, because national issues are purportedly seen as sexier, so to speak, and more appealing than local municipal issue. And I think it has a lot to do with the changing of the news reporting technology that's going on. So I wonder if the internet as it exists can be used to pay more attention to local issues rather than gluing our eyeballs on national issues, I suppose.
I think it does. I think the internet has a massive role in playing in covering our local democracies. The issue becomes who's going to take up the mantle to cover it, because as much as I try to cover as much as I possibly can across Canada, I know that people sometimes tune in, sometimes don't tune in, and there are people who will listen to certain shows and not listen to other shows. It's because municipalities do not get the same coverage, because like I said, it's the political partisanship that has so conquered this world that we want to see that in our municipal local governments, and we're not. So when we have the internet, who literally anyone can be a journalist at the touch of their hands, it's who do you consider a journalist? Who do you go to be that source of information, to get the most accurate information and quote unquote unbiased information? And I'll be honest, there's political bias in my show. I will probably be the first to admit that and not the last to admit that. I think, though, when it comes to municipalities, you try to come in with a mindset that is unbiased. And though people who just have a microphone to spew off things for the sake of spewing off things for clicks, for money, I think it doesn't sell. It doesn't sell when you talk about municipal issues, unless it's ugly. Hey, the mayor's not a pro-cop, pro-oil mayor, and we need to attack them and we need to fight them left, right, and center. Well, okay. How does that help me as a human being? How does that help me as a resident of the community to ensure that what's happening at City Hall is going to help me pay my taxes, live in my house comfortably, ensure that I can get to and from work every day via the roads that are under the city's control? When I talk about issues on my show that are municipal, I try to bring it back to that. I literally started a big giant board. You can't see it right now, but it's off screen, where it literally has one question: how is this going to help people? How is this reporting that I'm about to put out there right now going to help people understand the issues that are going on in the community? So this week, I literally yesterday, Friday, recorded this. I sat down with the mayor of Hanwell Rural Community in the province of New Brunswick. The reason I did was because the council had voted 4-2 to suspend a sitting councillor. Now, this is not unusual in this country. The reason why it's so unusual, and the reason I wanted to cover it, was because I had a councillor from Hanwell on the show, and he was the one who had been sort of he was the one who had got suspended from council. So I wanted to get the other side of the story, because I don't traditionally consider myself a journalist. I consider myself a host of a show that talks about municipal issues. So when I wanted to have this person on, I literally kept on thinking in the back of my head, how is this going to help the people of the community understand what's going on? And I think it's helped me. I just don't think a lot of people understand that reporting is not just saying something and hoping that people will come to you. It's knowing that if I get 100 likes on this, or 10 likes or 50 likes, I'm still comfortable knowing that I've done the best job that I can do.
So, final question. Think I've listened to one of your programs, which is, I think, is fantastic, and you mentioned the apathy and perhaps cynicism of the voting public, or certain members of the voting public. And the way I see it, the people who express the most amount of cynicism towards the political process, left or right, tend to be the first to vote for, say, certain populist candidates. I don't know if Maxime Bernier qualifies as one in Canada, but throughout the Western world, there have been a resurge of populism, whether it's Le Pen in France, or of course still Trump in the United States, and I guess the Brexit Party in England. These are formed by people who believe that the political institution, so to speak, regardless of whoever's in charge, is governed by special interests, so to speak, that run counter against the will of the people. And E.M. Forster says, "Two cheers for democracy." So, do you suppose there's a connection between paying more attention to the democratic processes of local government versus bolstering the trust in the legitimacy of the democratic process as a whole?
That's a great question. That's a fantastic question. And I think populism is here to stay. I don't think it's going to be something, and I think Trump has changed the way that that politics is done. We have two political leaders in this country: Maxime Bernier, which you name checked, the leader of the People's Party of Canada, a former Conservative cabinet minister who was kicked out of cabinet under Andrew Scheer, and Pierre Poilievre, and he's the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. I would say they traditionally are conservatives, but I think they're leaning into the more populist conversation. And I think the reason I say that, because people want something to vote for. People want something to go out and actually get excited for. And the populism message does get people riled up. It does get people talking about things. And locally, we are seeing a more populist entrance into the local political arena. We have two mayors that I can think off the top of my head that are considered more populist, and they're under investigation because the populist movement doesn't work in municipal governments, because municipal governments, the mayor is one vote here in Canada. You are one vote, just like your councillor. The only thing that is different from a mayor and councillor is you get to sit in the big chair compared to the small chair. So the mayor don't always remember the fact that the populist movement is under the assumption that I'm the leader, I'm going to move things forward. Where municipally it's everyone's in this together, we're going to do this together. So I would highly suspect that the populist movement is in Canada to fade away. Do I think that it's going to continue to creep into the municipal politics? Yes. Do I think that municipalities are set up to fight back against the populist movement? No, but I think that there's laws and rules that are there that can sort of help out.
Mhm. Well, on that wonderful note, thank you very much, Chris Brown, not the R&B singer, but the host of the Cross Borders podcast, for joining this program.
Thank you.